All right, class, today this would be the second in the series of dealing with the mole. And the other day we learned how to figure out if you have 1 mole of a substance, or what we call or how to find the mass, called the molar mass. And if it's an element, we found that was really simple, that 1 mole and the unit value of that is 6.022 times 10 to the 23rd. Atoms or particles of a particular substance. And if you have that many atoms of, let's say, carbon or boron or whatever, you just go to the periodic table, and that becomes, that mass on there is your mass in grams of 1 mole of a substance. Today what we're going to answer, and this is going to kind of get into stuff that we're going to deal with a little bit later, is what happens if I have more than 1 mole, which is quite frequently the case in chemical reactions, which is what we're going to deal with kind of our next section, our next chapter. We're going to deal with chemical reactions and what's called chemical equations. A lot of that is similar to a recipe in a sense, that like you would make for chocolate chip cookies. There's a certain amount that you have to put, and so often you're dealing not with an exact amount of 1 mole. It would be really easy if that was the case. In this case, often you're dealing with more than 1 mole or less than 1 mole. And so you may be dealing with really tiny amounts, or you may be dealing with large amounts. Well, how much does that convert to in grams? We know how much 1 mole is. That's easy. You go to the periodic table. But how much is it actually there? So you'll notice we start with 5 moles of carbon here. So in this case, we don't have 1 mole. So how would I convert that and figure out, well, how many grams is that? I know how many grams 1 mole is. How many grams is 5 moles? And you'd probably be thinking, well, that's easy. You just multiply 5 by, whatever the mass is. And you'd be basically correct. But before we do that, what we want to show you is how to figure out, or how to set up the conversion, because that's what we're really going to do. And this is going to be true not only in this section, but in the sections to come. Part of this is something we learned back way at the beginning of the year, what we called unit analysis, and we used it when we were dealing with metric units. We're now going to continue to use that here with the mole. So our starting point is we have 5 moles of carbon. And really our question is, if I was to, in a sense, draw here, my question is, how many grams is that? So that's what I want to find out. So how would I set that up? Well, I'm going to start with what I know, okay, and that is 5. And I have 5 moles, and I don't need to write the carbon. That's not important. And really what I'm wanting to find out is how many grams is that. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up what's called a conversion. And if you remember back at the beginning of the year, what we dealt with when we dealt with conversions is you're going to multiply by a fraction. So I'm going to set up a fraction. So if I don't know anything else, I'm going to set up a fraction. And then I'm going to have something on top and something on bottom. And what I'm going to put on bottom is I'm going to deal with my units first. So before I deal with any numbers, I want to deal with units. And right now, currently I'm in moles. So if you see here, I'm in moles. I don't want to be in moles, so I'm going to put moles here on the bottom. Why on the bottom? Because here basically it's on top. This is in the numerator, so this is basically over 1. So what will happen to my units of moles is they'll cancel out. That takes care of moles. What units do I want to be in? Well, I want to be in grams. Okay, so I'm going to put grams up top here in the formula. So now I've got my units taken care of. My moles are canceled out. I've got grams there. So now I can put my numbers in. So the question is, what numbers do I put in each one? Well, kind of a little secret is whenever I'm going from grams to moles or moles to grams, whenever I'm doing a conversion there, moles is always 1. I have 1 mole. So the question is, in 1 mole of carbon, how many grams are there? So the answer to that is, you guys actually should already know that. I just go to my periodic table, find carbon. I know that 1 mole of carbon is equal to the atomic mass there in grams, which is going to be 12.01. And then I can go ahead, and the rest of the part is easy. It's just easy math. So I could go ahead, and if I had a calculator handy, then I would multiply that out, and I would find that the answer is equal to 60.05. Okay, and again, don't forget to put your unit. That's grams, and then that would be your answer. So if you want to box your answer, there you go. Okay, you're done with that one. So let's move on to another one and kind of show you, well, that's easy with how you set up if you have, let's say, an individual element. What if you have, let's start with this here. Let's say we have half a mole of, let's do water. Okay, so we'll keep it simple. So we have half a mole of water, or H2O, is what we have. And so in this case, we have a compound, not an element. So how would we find that? How would we set that up? How would we go from moles into grams? How would I find out how many grams that is? Okay, same basic principle. I'm going to set it up. I have half a mole, and I'm going to multiply it by a fraction. And on the bottom, I'm going to put moles. Moles are going to cancel out. Up top, and if I want to put this over 1, I can do that. Up top here, I'm going to put grams. And then the difference is I'm going to add up how many, well, I know this is 1 mole here. In 1 mole, how many grams of water are there? And we showed how you do this the other day. You take, I have 2 hydrogens, and times the grams of hydrogen that there are, 1.01 grams, which is going to give me 2.02. And then you had 1 oxygen, and times the value of oxygen, which is 16 grams, and so that gives you 16 grams of oxygen, and the total ends up being the molar mass of water is 18.02. And so I'm going to continue, and from here, once I have that set up, then I'm going to go ahead and do my math, and my final answer would ultimately be, and actually let me erase some things here first. So let's go ahead and erase this stuff here so we have some room in which to write our answer here. So we'll erase all of this stuff down below. And remember, you do want to show your work. So all this work that I'm showing here is necessary. Sometimes I know you can do it in your head because you guys are smart, but I want to see it on paper, because that will allow me to see, did you set it up correctly and everything. So if we go ahead and do our math here, 0.5 moles times 18.02 grams per mole of water, and that's the molar mass of water. That's what goes here. So right here, this area right here is always the molar mass. In other words, how many grams in 1 mole of whatever it is we're talking about. In this case, it's water. Last time it was carbon. It could be a molecule that's more complex. It doesn't matter. What goes here always is the molar mass, which you're going to get off the periodic table. So if I do my math here, I'm going to end up with 9.01, and again, this is grams, is what I want to know. And so that would be my answer to this particular equation. Now, I can actually do the opposite as well, and I'll show you guys how to do that. What if I wanted to go the other direction? What if I started with grams and I wanted to know how many moles that was? And this will come into play a little bit later when we talk about chemical equations, because chemical equations are often written with the number of moles of a particular compound that you have that you're going to mix with another compound. And we'll deal with that in another chapter. So, for example, let's say I start with, okay, here we go. Let's say I start with 5 grams of, let's say nitrogen. Okay, so I have 5 grams of nitrogen, and the question is, how many moles is that? Okay, so I want to know, I have 5 grams, I want to know how many moles is that. Well, if I look on my periodic table, I can tell that 1 mole of nitrogen will equal 14.01 grams. So obviously I have less than a mole, and I probably can't do this right in my head. And so I need to kind of figure out, well, what exactly is this? What is the exact amount of moles? So we're going to do something very similar to what we just did, except really we're kind of doing this in reverse. We're doing unit analysis, so I'm going to start with what I know. I know I have 5 grams, and I'm going to multiply by a fraction. Anytime I'm converting from one unit, like grams here, and I'm going to another unit, I always want to multiply by a fraction. And I want to get out of the units that I'm in, so if I want to put this over 1, that's fine. Put the units that I'm in, which is grams, so that they cancel out. And then I want to go to moles, so I'm going to put moles up here, up top. And we know that moles, whenever you're dealing with molar mass, moles is always 1. So in 1 mole, how many grams do I have? Now you notice in this case, when we started in grams, in the fraction, the grams ends up on bottom. So that's why you want to pay attention to your units here, so that you know what ends up on bottom and what ends up on top, because it changes depending on what your starting point is. Again, this whole thing right here, this is always your molar mass. So what I want to do is find out in 1 mole of nitrogen how many grams are there. And so I'm going to go to the periodic table to find that out. And I go to the periodic table and I find out, well, that's 14.01 grams are in 1 mole. And then I go ahead and do my math, figure out what that 5 times 1 is 5, and then divided by 14.01. And so if I did that on my calculator here, then I would end up with an answer. Well, the number of moles that I have is 0.3, and you'll get a big long number, but we're going to round off to the nearest hundredth is what we will round off to. And so it's 0.36 moles of nitrogen is what my answer would be. And so that's my answer there for this particular problem. And so that's how I would set that up in this case. I'm going to give you a couple problems on the next couple slides here, and one type of conversion each, and I want you to do them and practice them looking at your notes, looking at what we talked about. I want you to try them, and these need to be in your notes as you come to class tomorrow and you attempting to solve them, and I want to see your work as you do them. So let's start with this first one here, and let's say we have let's go with this 2.5 moles, and let's say we have 2.5 moles of chlorine. Okay, so we have 2.5 moles of chlorine, and we want to know how many grams is that. So the question is, how many grams is that? So you want to convert from the 2.5 moles, and you want to convert into grams. So that's going to be our first problem for you guys to do. Okay, and I want to see the answer to that. The other one that we're going to do real quickly is, let's do this one here, is let's say we have 20 grams of sodium chloride. So you have a compound this time, and you're starting in grams. And the question is, how many moles is that? So that's your second conversion that I want you to try at home, and then we'll see if you get them correct in class. All right? All right, thank you guys. See you later.